The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Sunday study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC. Today's episode is themed Completing the Black Revolution, How the Party Survived Counterinsurgency, Part 2. This week, we continue the studying of Chapter 3 of the book, Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We'll pick back up on page 81 at the subhead, Imperialist Violence Sets Back Our Anti-Colonial Struggle. It is very important to mention that before Chairman Omali Yeshitela, there had not been a comprehensive analysis of the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. That is to say, it was the chairman who summed up that our movement had been crushed militarily, suffered ideologically, and thusly he was determined to rescue our struggle, exemplified with the existence of the African People's Socialist Party today. This chapter shows the critical leadership that Chairman Omali provided to the process of rebuilding the African liberation movement. It proves his unwavering commitment to the struggle for the freedom of African people and the destruction of the colonial mode of production. Whereas the option existed to surrender to opportunism, to quote unquote retire, Chairman Omali faced the bullets, the firebombs, the jailings, the tear gas, the white left and ideological imperialism, and now flashbang grenades, summing up and building along the way. He was the last man standing. Now our movement is in a greater position with political leadership, structure, theory, and organization, making it impossible for any of the colonizers' counterinsurgency attempts to defeat us once again. This time till it's won. We are winning. As a reminder, the study materials are linked in the description of this video. We will read alongside the leader of the African nation and worldwide African revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, then follow with announcements before opening it up for question and answers with our live audience. And as always, we call on you to spread the word and build the Omali Taught Me show by sharing this study far and wide. Taking a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment in the chat and tag someone else in the chat to participate in today's study. We are fully aware of the war being made on our right, not only to say what is in our interest, but for the people to have access to what we say as well. So thank you for taking this moment to like, comment, share, subscribe. And now let's get started and welcome our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
The fact that in the United States, today is what is considered Father's Day, a day, at least in theory, and in many ways, people, including African people in this country who are swept up with most of the colonial holidays, etc., celebrate Father's Day to some extent or another. And I say this because I have to recognize that this is the same government that now talks about Father's Day, that did everything possible, along with the whole white colonizer project, to disrupt our families. That there are African people who I shout out to, my sister-in-law, Afua, who is in Ghana. Who cannot even come to this country because of the fact that the colonizer controls all of our lives and controls virtually every aspect of our lives. And so just to get the ability, just to get a visa to visit her husband, who lives in this country, who is my biological brother, cannot occur without the permission of the colonizer who separated us and spread us all around the world. Beyond that, the fact is that Africans everywhere around the world have been forcibly dispersed. We are trapped with the fact that so many of us are biologically related but don't even know each other. We come from the same places and end up separated to people into places called Brazil today and Haiti and what is the United States and Jamaica and all these other places around the world and even in parts of Europe, not knowing each other as biological relatives. But the fact is, that's who we are. And the question of Father's Day, for us also is something that has to overcome the imposition of foreign and colonial practices and habits and culture and designations of family that disrupt the tradition and history of African people ourselves. I think about the fact that the reality is that all the African children are my children. And that is an African tradition. That's just the way it's been. That's why the whole concept of brothers and sisters that we hear, how we hear Africans naturally, normally speaking to each other. That's the origin of it. While some people think it has to do with a relationship to the Christian church, et cetera, the fact is it has to do with so much more in terms of the forms of the family that existed for Africa and African peoples that predates the emergence of Europe and the pretense of being a civilized entity on the planet Earth, the whole concept of relationships. And so the fact is that all of the children are my children. And in terms, on a personal level, just in terms of this question of fathers and Father's Day, on a personal level, I know in many ways, my recognition of all the African children as my children, which is a part of our culture and tradition, the children who are my biological children, I've been a horrible father in that regard. And when it comes to like a personal relationship and this struggle I've made against our enslavement as a people all around the world, the struggle I've made against the disruption of our culture, the disruption of our freedom, a disruption of our ability to see the world has estranged me in many instances from our own biological children. This is part of the reality. I'm struck by the fact that there are many African men of my generation who live within the United States, the borders of what is currently referred to as the United States as an indigenous land, that the terror has been so ubiquitous that in many instances it is treated as normal. That I grew up being estranged from my mother, as I think it happened with many African men of my generation. Whose expression of love for us resulted in becoming substitute slave masters to try to protect us from death, that white power, that this country and white people in this country and the establishment would visit upon us, and mothers who would say, as my mother did, that I'm going to beat it out of you before the white man gets you. And this was an expression of love that they had for their sons. And this is just a part of the entire history. And so the work that I've done, my children, I remember some of my children, it's not especially the first 3 or 4 of my children who grew up proclaiming hatred of Black power because it was Black power. The fight for Black power kept their daddy in jail, kept their daddy in prison, and things like this. And it did contribute to estrangement between me and my children, some of my children, and what have, and certainly it distorted relationships. And this is what colonialism does for all of us. So we say, Happy Father's Day, and recognize that in many instances, becoming real fathers, becoming protectors of our children require us to step beyond just the forms of the family imposed on us by the social system. And that the real protection of our children requires us to fight for their future and for the future of all our children, and to see that's the only way our children will ever have a potential for seeing a future that's not enslaved, that does not require them to become buffoons that can run fast and jump high and sing good songs and do interesting dances and things like that. That we have to have the vision to fight for all of our children and to become organized. And that's what this meeting and this discussion is about, to become organized and to become influenced by a philosophy that does not condemn us because we would do what many people call like sacrificing family, because our family is so much greater than what our colonizers would have us to understand. The whole African nation is our family. The good, the bad, our family. And that's the thing that the only way we will become free is to recognize that and to fight for specific kinds of structures within this that will keep us on the mission to destroy these colonial structures that have been imposed on us that will not allow us to have what we would characterize as normal family relations, normal family lives, so that our brothers and sisters who were snatched up and taken to Brazil, or who were left in the place that's now called Ghana, or a place now called Congo, our brothers and sisters who were snatched up and taken to Haiti, or brought to what is now called St. Louis, will be able to recognize this relationship, and going beyond recognizing this relationship, be conscious of the need to have a movement that is perpetually, that is always working to destroy systems and structures that have divided us and that continue to facilitate the bleeding of our resources, our humanity, our dignity as the conditions for its existence. So with that, happy Father's Day. I want to go into this section of the study, calling on all of us to pay particular attention and hoping that people will recognize the fact that this is really a part of a political report to our party. And we have a political report because ours is not just some movement based on spontaneity, what's happening at the moment. Obama got elected, Trump got elected, et cetera. The police killed somebody in St. Louis or murdered somebody in New York City. It's not just that. These are factors, these are things that do occur and have occurred, but they occur within a particular kind of system. And our party has a responsibility. It's a dynamic process. It's not just that happened in New York. Like some people like to point to COINTELPRO, and that happened in such and such a period of time. But we need to understand that what they characterize as counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, was a part of a counterinsurgency, part of a tool that is utilized to keep African people locked into this relationship with colonialism. And if it were not COINTELPRO, as it is characterized, the colonial state requires other means by which we would be controlled. And it is my firm belief that what we've come to know as COINTELPRO and FBI activity and actions against us is probably diversionary in the sense that even though this program did exist, the fact that we continue to talk about it, the fact that it is made, it has become evident and obvious to us means that it is less significant as a program than all the other stuff that they have done, were done, et cetera. And it's like throwing the COINTELPRO under the bus, while the other means through which the colonial state utilizes to keep us locked into a state of permanent subservience and subjugation. I think it's really important for us to understand that, because we will talk about COINTELPRO here. But I want us to really understand that our party constantly recognizing that this is not a static, that every aspect of this relationship is not static, it's dynamic. It's affected by things happening in the greater world, as I say, beyond where we are located, specific locations that we are in, beyond the specific laws that have been imposed on us at any given moment, it recognizes a whole mode of production, something that is necessary for the continuation of a social system that's based on genocide, and based on the enslavement of the vast majority of the people on the planet Earth. We are talking today about things like Palestine. We've talked about Vietnam. We talk about Cuba. We talk about Iran. We talk about Iraq. We talk about what's happening in St. Louis and New York and Mississippi and all these different places, precisely because there's an existing social system here. And this social system is global. And it's locked the vast majority of the people on Earth into it in a very parasitic relationship. And those of us who function as hosts to this parasite, and the parasite is not really that large, but it's effective. It's like a tick that can bring down a cow because it sucks all the blood, and that's the parasite that we are dealing with today. That's called colonialism and the colonial mode of production. So this study that we're involved in, I really want us to recognize what it provides for us in terms of helping to understand the history of our party, the history of the struggle that we've been involved in for a long period of time, from the height of the Black Revolution of the 60s, when colonialism and the struggle against colonialism was at its apex, from this period until now, how the African People's Socialist Party has been consistently involved in summing it up and defining it and coming up with tactics and strategies, not just for an Obama or a Trump or Biden, but for the whole social system that gives rise to and provides shelter for the Trumps and the Bidens and the rest of them. So, and the Obamas, for that matter. Anyway, please work with me because this has to provide an education for us, an understanding for us beyond just the reading of this thing. And we need to be able to see the role of the African People's Socialist Party. And I say this without hesitation. The role the African People's Socialist Party has played in exposing the contradictions that gave rise to this moment that we live with today. The fact that the United States government feels that it's necessary to put me in prison for 15 years to crush the African Revolution, to crush the aspirations of African people to be free, to create demoralization among the masses of our people, hopefully to be able to push me down so that I become a groveling force that would demoralize Black people here, to contribute to a notion that it is irresponsible to fight for total liberation of our people, and that it is something that cannot be won. That's what part of what their objective is. And my objective, of course, with the African People's Socialist Party, has to be to continue to defy that and to expose the contradiction and to expose the rot of this social system, to expose the fact that it trembles every time an African in North St. Louis, or an African in the place that's now called Ghana, or in the townships of South Africa, every time we wake up in the morning and recognize what is happening to us and try to get organized to deal with it, this system trembles. Every time a Mexican crossed that artificially created border to come to the California and the Texas and the other entities that they've created as a part of dispossessing the people, this system trembles. That they have to, while they're sending warships to the Mediterranean to protect the artificial white nationalist entity that's called Israel on the one hand, they're sending tanks into an impoverished sector of the African community here in St. Louis, and they've done it over and over again. In the 1960s, it didn't just start to crush this revolutionary movement and the aspirations of our people. We shall win. We are winning. So let's go to imperialist violence sets back our anti-colonial struggle. And we are on page 81, as has already been declared. And the comrade Director Akile, granddaughter, I know that you'll keep me apprised of the time, and hopefully I can be quite more expeditious than I was last week, and in moving this study forward. So imperialist violence sets back our anti-colonial struggle. The COINTELPRO objectives, this is the counterintelligence program created by the FBI, spelled out in this August 25th, 1967 memorandum sent by the FBI to field offices throughout the United States, is telling in its slander, lies, and efforts to criminalize and set back the Black Revolution, to set the Black Revolution up for violence and assault. This is a quote from it, from this memorandum by the FBI about COINTELPRO, 1967. The purpose of this new counterinsurgence endeavor is to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activists of Black nationalist hate-type organizations and groupings, their leadership, spokesmen, membership, and supporters, and to counter their propensity for violence and civil disorder. Didn't say stop violence, their propensity. So this is an act that moves a whole army of forces, like the one who attacked my home at 5 o'clock in the morning on July 22nd, July 29th, 2022, not because I've done anything. It's say these military forces are attacking our propensity, not violence, propensity for violence as determined by those who hold the guns. It says the activities of such groups of intelligence interest to the Bureau must be followed on a continuous basis. So we will be in a position to promptly take advantage of all opportunities for counterintelligence and inspire actions in instances where circumstances warrant. The pernicious background of such groups, their duplicity and devious maneuvers must be exposed to public scrutiny, where such publicity will have a neutralizing effect. Efforts of the various groups to consolidate their forces or to recruit new or youthful adherents must be frustrated. No opportunity should be missed to explore through counterintelligence techniques the organizational and personal conflicts of the leadership of the groups, and where possible, efforts should be made to capitalize upon existing conflicts between competing Black nationalist organizations. So, I mean, they are, really clear that, that even personal relationships that we enter into are not as personal as we think they are. And that the government, the colonizers, in what would perhaps in normal circumstances be just the relationship between a husband and wife, or a child and parents, et cetera, taken and used to create conflict, to create divisions. This is an ongoing part of what the project is. Talk about Father's Day. So it says that here that when an opportunity is apparent to disrupt and neutralize Black nationalist hate-type organizations through the cooperation of established local news media contacts, or through such contacts with sources available to the seat of government, which meant the FBI, in every instance, careful attention must be given to the proposal to ensure the targeted group is disrupted, ridiculed, or discredited through the publicity and not merely publicized. And I guess this is one of the problems, the failures they had with the attack they made on us, because the FBI agent, when they were at our homes, made it a point to let us know with no little smirking that this is going to be big news. This is going to be in the news. And so as opposed to simply to discrediting us and doing all the things that's called for, what they've done is publicize us. And that there are millions of people who knew nothing about the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement who know now. And there are millions of people who will not be, cannot be simply brought into this strategic objective by the FBI in terms of an attack on us, because they will see and they are able to see, if they don't see it already, the government's involvement in the assault on what would normally be considered rights of the people. And whereas it has typically and historically been possible to paint a picture of Black people and others as someone's outside of civilized behavior that the government had to control and contain, in this instance, the FBI is telling the world that they attacked us because of what we said. And that is problematic because people want to say things. And all people want to say things, and white people want to say things, and liberals want to say things, and white reactionaries want to say things. And so at the point where this government can say that it is attacking us because of what we said, whether they intended to or not, they brought us into the company of a whole bunch of people in this country and throughout the world who want to say things. And so it's our responsibility to expose that this is what is going on. So the political structures within which the U.S. domestic anti-colonial struggle was being waged, all of the structures, all of these structures came under siege. In the mid-1960s, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, briefly became the center of anti-colonial resistance within the U.S. In the meantime, with the rise of African national consciousness, of the African working class-led movement, other anti-colonial organizations began an outright challenge to confining the African struggle to civil rights or rights within the colonial capitalist system. Among these were the hunter militant organizations, JOMO, and the Black Panther Party, the African People's Party, and the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa were others. These organizations and the Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, were influenced ideologically by Malcolm X, who left the original Nation of Islam in a split that divided that group between religious obscurantists, philosophical idealists, and the growing materialist influenced revolutionary ideology and practice being promoted by Malcolm X. The masses of African people were part of the wave of anti-colonial struggle sweeping the planet. The chains of colonial domination were being shattered everywhere: Kenya, Korea, Ghana, Congo, Vietnam, Cuba, Grenada, Algeria, Oakland, California, and St. Petersburg, Florida. The colonial capitalist ruling class had been defeated politically and ideologically within the United States and throughout the world. Part of that defeat was to be seen in the creation of independent political organizations. The Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania is an example, but there were also the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army, the Mau Mau, the Zimbabwe African National Union, the Black Panther Party, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, New Jewel Movement of Grenada, JOMO, and the African People's Socialist Party. So this is what we were looking at. It's really important to recognize this, that the whole world was involved in a struggle against colonialism, not some simple empty stuff like Black Lives Matter. People wanted to have power over our own lives, which meant that we had to negate the power, overturn the power of the colonizer that controlled our lives. So many others developed in Africa and worldwide. Their main significance lay in the fact that they represented the intention of the colonized to seek solutions for ourselves outside the structures and political and ideological framework of the colonizers. They had won the support and participation of the broad masses of the hundreds of millions of colonized Africans and others determined to end our relationship with foreign colonial domination. And that's what we're talking about. Comrades, while many of our people have been convinced that our colonial oppression is due to so-called racist whites or the colonizers simply not liking us, the fact is that the entire success of the colonizers, all the wealth, happiness, and democratic rights enjoyed by them require our colonization. In other words, there has always been a material basis for our oppression to which the colonial hatred and brutality owe their existence. I was in a discussion the other day. I'm sorry, I was in the process of doing an interview, and the technical contradictions prevented that interview from being aired. That would have been WBAI in New York. Some of you are familiar with that station. And the comrade who was interviewing me had trouble reconciling the position of the African People's Socialist Party as identifying the primary target as colonialism and not racism, because he's part of a movement that's challenging all of these anti-Black symbols and things that happen in the movie. Right now, there's a whole struggle with Netflix because of they put forth this a cartoon version of a sitcom, situation comedy that happened some years ago. So for him and many like him, they understand that this hatred, of Black people and this promotion of anti-Black attitudes of hatred, et cetera, is profoundly significant to us too. But that's not the primary contradiction. The only reason it's a problem that he's identifying, the only reason it's a problem is because they got power over our lives. And we don't have power over our lives. Therefore, from our perspective, then the objective is to win power over our lives, is to win that power over our lives so that they can say and think whatever the hell they want. And that we won't always be in a position of trying to protest some position, something that they think about us, because we'll negate their ability to do that in part by creating our own capacity to define ourselves. So that it's not Netflix, it's Blackflix, it's Afroflex, it's what we do that counters and negates their capacity to do that. And the thing is, it's that whole philosophy of integrationism, anti-racism, et cetera, that makes us dependent. You will see from the emergence of this whole anti-racist thing as the popular kind of struggle that Black people should be involved in. From the emergence of that time when we said that what we should be involved in is some kind of integration with white power, what you see is a disintegration of those independent institutions that Black people had. From the time that I've seen something where they're talking about Josh Gibson. Josh Gibson is one of the greatest baseball players in history. They said this guy could hit a baseball and it would disappear. They said that the reason they wouldn't allow Josh Gibson to come into the white people's baseball league is that because they were protecting Babe Ruth, because there's no way in hell that Babe Ruth would have been able to stand up against what Josh Gibson. Look at Satchel Paige pitching, who they finally let into the major leagues, pitching at 59, no hitters at 59 years in the major leagues, et cetera. So the whole thing is that now there is no Negro League. Now they're talking about they're going to now count the records of people like Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson, into the records of the overall league. But the reason that league disappeared is because our ambition was to come into their stuff as opposed to concentrating on our stuff. And that wasn't, I'm not saying this was silly, because in some ways that's what people saw the future of. They could not see a future independent of what Garvey was trying. They couldn't see the future that Garvey was trying to create, so that we build our power that minimizes and neutralizes their power. Just think about that. I mean, you're talking Willie Mays is one guy, but a whole league of Willie Mayses, of Black people of Willie Mays, Jackie Robinson, who they allowed into. I think Josh Gibson. I'm trying to remember. He may have died or something like that a couple of days before they let Jackie Robinson in. But they let Jackie Robinson in because he was a nice guy, because he would take being spat upon and all this other kind of stuff, where many Africans would not have been able to do that. And my point is, comrades, is that this whole thing about racism and where it comes from. And so we said that. We said that the colonial capitalists lost the political and ideological authority. Let me go back. Comrades, so while many of our people have been convinced, this is on 83, that our colonial oppression is due to quote unquote racist whites or the colonizers simply not liking us, the fact is that the entire success of the colonizers, all the wealth, everything they've got, you're talking about reparations, what they owe us, what they got, all the wealth, happiness, and democratic rights. If they do have happy families, if they do have it, it's based on our enslavement and the disruption of our families, et cetera. And the democratic rights they have, And we talk about democratic rights. We're talking about the Constitution. We're talking about the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights that this government has no problem in dispensing with when it comes to raiding our homes at 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning, attacking us for talking. This government that has no problem doing that. They wrote this democratic rights into a constitution for them. And it wrote it on a foundation of stolen land. It's stolen land that made laws that said they can put Leonard Peltier, an indigenous man upon whose land they have built this empire, was stolen. He's starving, his family is starving, the indigenous people in this country are starving, but this is where they built their rights. All the democracy that they talk about has its foundation on exploitation and oppression. This is the reality that we have to be aware of, and this is the reality they don't want us to talk about, and that's why they will kill us from talking and put us in prison forever for talking. That's why they killed Malcolm X for talking. That's why they killed Martin Luther King for talking. That's why they disrupted the Black Panther Party for talking. That's what it's all about. They do not want us to be able to have this discussion, not just with each other as Africans, but with the whole world, even with the colonizers themselves, who haven't the slightest damn idea of why it is that they got stuff and we don't have stuff. I mean, when I say they don't have an idea, they don't know the natural process. They don't know the process through which this occurred. They believe the garbage is because they're so smart and so beautiful. They believe it until they look in the mirror and see themselves as individuals. And they know they ain't that damn smart, and they know they ain't that damn beautiful. It's only when they are put into a situation, locked into a situation with the rest of us, where they function as a part of the parasitic grip that's on the rest of us, where their success, their happiness, their future of their children relies on maintaining this relationship that makes it possible for them to say, yeah, let's go to Palestine and call it Israel and kill the Palestinian people, keep their land, take their land because it's good for us. And think about this, when you look in this country that we live in today, this territory that we refer to as America, where would it be without the attack on the indigenous people here? How are you going to have it? It's colonialism is absolutely necessary. That all the happiness. And then, of course, on the production of Africa and African people here and around the world. Anyway, I've said too much. I'm going to go ahead and try to push this. Comrades, while many of our people have been convinced that our colonial oppression is due to racist whites or the colonizers simply not liking us, the fact is that the entire success of the colonizers, all the wealth, happiness, and democratic rights enjoyed by them require our colonization. That seems to me kind of simple to see once you articulate it. I mean, how are you going to have happy white people living in an overcrowded, disease-ridden England under some relative of Elizabeth, Lizzie, and Charles and the rest? What happened is they were trying to get the hell out of there. Just anything was, as Malcolm says, better than hell. So the colonial capitalists lost of political and ideological authority over our colonized communities. The US government's political and ideological defeat left the colonizers with only one logical response: military attack. Extreme violence. This was true all over the world, but this was especially true within the United States. Here, our movement inside the imperialist center, the headquarters of human oppression and exploitation, inspired the fighting peoples of the world and presented white power with an existential crisis. What do we mean existential? We mean the existence. The crisis revolved around its continued ability to exist. Because the U.S. front of the Black Revolution of the 60s threatened the very foundation of world capitalism. The U.S. initiated this counterinsurgency with no recognition of our political prisoners, no protocols for the treatment of our prisoners of war, or features of what the colonizer recognized as quote unquote civilized conduct, much less the admission that the assault on our revolution was indeed a war. So attacks on Joe Moore efforts to build a statewide party. So our success in building the party and the fact that our movement survived the counterinsurgency that defeated the Black Revolution of the 60s should not be interpreted to mean that we were untouched by the U.S. counterinsurgency. In Iswe Letu, the political report to our third Congress, we summed up, quote, It was the resilience of Jomo and the party that defied the counterinsurgency, that denied the counterinsurgency its ultimate victory. For although the Black liberation movement was destroyed as a movement, the birth of the party in 1972 as a part of the revolutionary continuum was the birth of a political force that was clear on its mission to complete the Black revolution of the 60s. Our party was founded on May of 1972 by the merger of three previously separate groups. The primary organization of the three groups was JOMO, the hunter militant organizations based in St. Petersburg, Florida, and Lexington and Louisville, Kentucky. The others were the Black Rights Fighters in Fort Myers and the Black Study Group of Gainesville, Florida. JOMO was the dominant organization by virtue of its political experience, its longer history, and its urban working class base and character. The Black Rights Fighters was essentially an organization of migrant farm workers and organizers, and the Gainesville Black Study Group was an organization of community-based students and intellectuals. Uhuru Nyindu, I want to salute Nyindu, who was there in Fort Myers, who was a founding member of the African People's Socialist Party in the Black Rights Fighters. Both the climate of political terror directed at the revolution and our own inexperience prevented the use of a founding Congress or some other publicized mass meeting to bring the party into existence. And I can't overstate this, the terror. I mean, there were actually times when people would be having meetings. We would be having meetings. The Black Panther Party local organization would be having meetings, and the doors would be kicked in. And they'd be sometimes, with children, in the midst who were going through one of our programs. And the FBI or the police would crash in with guns and terrorize everybody in the building. They did things like pour all of the free breakfast program goods, materials that were going to be used to feed the children, put them in the middle of the room and either torch them or put kerosene and things like that to make it unusable. This is the kind of stuff the government was doing. So it was to even think about trying to have an open meeting. I mentioned yesterday in a meeting we were having that in between 1965 and 68, there was more than 256 uprisings in communities, African communities throughout this country. The people were trying to fight back, and the terror that was imposed to maintain the normalcy of enslaved Black people and covering that enslavement with sugar-coated words and documents and things like that, and injecting that into the educational system so that our people who were enslaved would be taught to be good slaves and would taught that slavery was freedom. I think it was one of the writers of 1984. This double speak that they created. So slavery is freedom, and this kind of nonsense. So earlier Jomo efforts, as an example, to build a revolutionary party in 1969-70 had been successfully blocked by the U.S. counterinsurgency. Even as the brutal U.S. colonial war was being directed at our movement, Jomo had organized regular monthly meetings of progressive African organizations throughout the state of Florida. This is 1969 and 70. And this is, Malcolm is assassinated, and King was assassinated in 68. 69, the attack was being made all over. That was the year they killed Fred Hampton. That was the year that they raided the New York, this Panther 21 trial, 21 members of the Black Panther Party. That was the year they raided the Black Panther office in Los Angeles with the intent of replicating in Los Angeles what they had done right there in Chicago in 1969. This was the stuff we were living with. But at this same time, this same time frame, the African People's Socialist Party was coming into existence through the leadership of Jomo in particular. So with our objective being to continue the Black Revolution of the 60s, not to fold, not to retreat for the whole movement, but to continue this Black Revolution of the 60s. So as I said earlier, Jomo efforts to build a revolutionary party in 1969, 1970 had been successfully blocked by the U.S. counterinsurgency. Even as the brutal U.S. colonial war was being directed at our movement, Jomo had organized regular monthly meetings of progressive African organizations throughout the state of Florida. It was precisely because Jomo was able to recognize the need to defend our revolution that it saw the monthly meetings as leading to the creation of a statewide party. The June 15, 29, 1970 issue of the Burning Spear, Jomo's political organ at the time, reported on that month's meeting. This is June 1970. Several Black organizations, this is a quote, ended their fourth statewide Black caucus since March on June 6th. As a result of the fourth caucus, several things happened. It was decided that Jomo and the Burning Spear are the official information and communication apparatus for the state movement. The need and name for a Black political party in the state was established. Details are to be worked out at the next caucus scheduled for Miami. The name of the party is the African Nationalist Progressive Party, unquote. The following long selection from Israel to E-Africa, that's the political report, is important for what it reveals about the serious anti-democratic and terroristic measures used by the U.S. bourgeois colonial state to crush our movement and attempt to derail our efforts to build a statewide party. And we recount it, and here's the quote. However, at the July Miami meeting, one of the meeting participants whom Jomo came to suspect as a government agent provocateur successfully fought from an anti-party ultra-leftist position to block the group from consolidating Jomo's party building effort. Then at the following meeting held in Daytona Beach, the provocateur, in violation of the June decision determining the Burning Spear as the group's organ, brought an African news reporter from the colonial white ruling class Miami Herald to the meeting. The consequence of this was an article in white ruling class publications throughout Florida on the morning following the meeting, which told of sinister efforts by members of the Black Liberation Army who were holding secretive meetings planning to, quote unquote, kill Whitey. The fact that the provocateur admitted authoring the article because he felt we needed the publicity, unquote, and that the group refused to expel him for this blatant, dangerous provocation meant that the government was successful in having the statewide meeting die on the vine. Later, a listing for the non-existing African Nationalist Progressive Party in the Miami telephone directory gave the address and phone number of the provocateur. So here's the guy who blocked it, who made it impossible to consolidate the African Nationalist Progressive Party, who succeeded in doing that, and now comes up in the Miami. That's where he lived, in Miami. We have this in the phone book. There's a address and phone number for this guy under the name of the African National Progressive Party that we tried to create. Such was the repressive political atmosphere during the period. In fact, on January 10th, 1973, within 8 months of the party's founding, Lawrence Mann, a member of the Central Committee, party co-founder, and leader of the Black Rights Fighters, was assassinated by automobile wreck. This act disrupted the effectiveness of our efforts to consolidate other members of the Black Rights Fighters into the party. Then on May of 1973, okay, so as this is January 73, then in May of 1973, the government arrested and re-imprisoned me at Florida State Prison on the old mural charge that I was initially arrested and imprisoned for as a SNCC member in December of 1966. However, our young party was able to mount a fierce resistance to my re-imprisonment and forced the government to release me within 2 months. But the government was not finished. After having attacked our newly founded party at 2 of its 3 legs, Fort Myers with the murder of Lawrence Mann, and St. Petersburg with my arrest and re-imprisonment, the colonial bourgeoisie attacked the party in Gainesville in June of 1973. This attack came in the form of a concerted effort to chase Couture Carey, a Central Committee member and party co-founder, out of the city. Born and reared in Virginia, Carey was fired from her job as a school teacher
having been isolated by outright FBI slander, which accused Carey of keeping a cache of weapons. The FBI also established a campaign of terrorizing Carey's neighbors in the rural community where she lived. This effort was led by the FBI and a former American and a North American former principal at a predominantly African high school who had become a city commissioner. This city commissioner, who had functioned in the military as a counterinsurgency expert and had written manuals on counterinsurgency, which were in the local public libraries, used counterinsurgency expertise and connections and his position as city commissioner to launch his attack on Carey. The consolidation of the party through a merger based primarily on quiet meetings between the leaders and members of the three merging groups instead of through a publicly announced Congress was mostly determined by the terroristic colonialist counterinsurgency. And even when the merger occurred without a Congress, the white ruling class colonialist state wasted no time in attempting to destroy us, but we survived. And in many ways we thrived, although not without contradictions. The threat by then U.S. Attorney General John Mitchell to destroy the Black Panther Party before the end of 1969 had been realized for all practical purposes. Indeed, it is important to remember that the Black Panther Party was the main target and bore the brunt of the colonialist counterinsurgency, the primary factor of the Panthers' demise. This was the period of the government assassination of several Black Liberation Army fugitives, the near assassination and arrest of Assata Shakur and Sundiata Acoli, as well as other anti-colonial African patriots of the Black Liberation Army, such as Herman Bell, Albert Newell, Washington, and others. The U.S. government aimed to systematically decapitate the revolutionary sector of our movement. George and Jonathan Jackson were executed by government agents. 43 rebelling prisoners and their captive guards were massacred in Attica prison, and more than 40 African prisoners were wounded by government troops at Florida State Prison, acts which had successfully followed the incarcerated revolution into the prison and set upon it with genocidal efficiency. Although it was a target of the vicious counterinsurgency of the 60s, suffering government infiltration and agent provocateurs, helicopter and armored vehicle attacks on our community base, massive arrests, beatings, and assassination attempts directed at me as its leader, Jomo was able to survive and lead the work to build the African People's Socialist Party in 1972. So this is part of the history. I mean, as you see, it's condensed here, just a real short period of time, how intense this assault was made. And then you see the party going through all of this stuff, you know, because even when you look at the split within the Black Panther Party, and sometimes, you know, we find ourselves, there are people who were political prisoners who were captured and locked up, and some just getting out of prison, some died in prison. The split within the Black Panther Party, and some people have fallen into, I believe, a sort of political trap in being able to weigh which faction was the best faction and the most correct faction, the revolutionary faction versus the non-revolutionary faction, the Eldridge Cleaver, Huey P. Newton faction. The fact is that the government created factions. And the thing is that there was no ability and capacity, partially due to the fact that the immaturity of our movement at that time, partially, but also because of the intense work that was being done by the FBI. We see when we read from this counterterrorism document that was part of what they would do. They would make this stuff happen, so you couldn't have that. But why was it that the disagreements that existed between sectors of the Black Panther Party did not get resolved within party congresses? Why didn't we say, okay, you know, strategically, you know, ultimately, we know the armed struggle is probably going to be necessary, but in the meantime, we're working on toward the deconstruction of the colonial project, because that's what the armed struggle is all about. It's just destroying the colonial project. But in the getting there, there are all kinds of things that's possible and that can be contained within a revolutionary organization, but they couldn't do it because the government intervened in this process and created chaos within the organization. So some people like Eldridge and some people like Huey and some people like the ones who went to prison and some people like and who didn't go to prison. And this is the stuff that's defined, you know, the period. And that's because of the intervention by the US government. You hear what I'm saying? Yeah. And so because we reached a point where what was defined as revolutionary was the willingness of somebody to pick up the gun. And it forced us at one point to come up with the characterization of, how do we put it? The acronym was ASS. Say it again. Yeah, the anguish slave syndrome. You know, the enemy does this and they kill this person. And so, you know, we were motivated more by anger at what the system was doing. I hear that all the time. You know, our warriors, you know, they just did this and that over there, and where our warriors, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, they piss me off. I mean, you see them, they piss us off. But you don't build a revolution based on being pissed off. Being pissed off should motivate you to build a revolution that overturns the goddamn system, not go shoot a particular cop. I mean, I've almost fallen into this trap. I'm not telling you something that that I was immune to in terms of the possibility of being thrust into that process, but we weren't thrust into it. And so anyway, U.S. government insurgency imposed deadly drugs on us. Let me see how we're looking.
You got 30 minutes, Chairman.
Oh, okay. I see Comrade Charles Barron has been trying to get in touch with me. So U.S. government counterinsurgency imposed deadly drugs on us. Quote, I mean, here's the way it reads. Ultimately, the colonial rulers imposed an illegal capitalist drug economy on the colony after denying African participation within the legal capitalist economy. So here's what they do. They make it impossible to get a job. They destroyed the economy in your community. Used to have grocery stores, used to have dry cleaners, U.S. service stations, all this stuff in the African community before the liberal Negroes got you desegregated, et cetera. And then you used to be able to go to work in many instances because you got to remember the whole labor pool of the United States and for the longest period of time was Black people. That's what we were brought here for, to go to work and also to steal the genius and technology that came with that. And then, you know, what happened is the colonial rulers imposed an illegal capitalist drug economy on the colony after denying African participation within the legal capitalist economy. So you can't work within the legal capitalist economy. So how you live? Do you stop? Do you just die? Because they said you can't live within the legal boundaries. You just go and wither where you die. You say you won't feed your children. You go through the humiliation of just being some idle force that's on your belly all the time. No, that's not going to happen. People are going to try to live. And if they put a wall around you of steel and guns all around you and contain your existence within the perimeters of this lockdown, and then what happens is that people get engaged in a struggle for resources just within that community. And then what they would do is open a door. And the door they open, you can make a living. Here's the dope. Here are the drugs, etc. And Africans become susceptible to it, not only because they want to make a living, because it becomes, in many ways, a painkiller. So you got the dope there. They killed a revolution that would take you toward overturning the system. So the drugs and the so-called Black leaders that they have picked for us lead us into just surviving with terror, just surviving with hunger. And I'm telling you that the whole thing about legalizing marijuana today is a part of numbing Black people who are living under the worst kind of oppression. And now Black people are competing about who's going to get the legal ability to sell dope in the Black community. And the whole thing is to narcotize the whole African community, demoralize the entire African community. So now you do have drugs in the community. You can have it legally now. You can get high. And which is one of the reasons from the very earliest period we were opposed to utilization of even of marijuana. At one time, obviously, because it's illegal and it sets you up, it would even come into your office and drop drugs and have to create a situation for the police to raid you. But the other thing is because philosophically, what drugs do, it presupposes that something is wrong with you. So you're living in the worst kind of situation. How do you deal with it? You don't deal with it by attacking the situation. You deal with it by getting high. There ain't nothing wrong with you. Something wrong with the damn system. So if you want to, I used to love Fred Hampton, get high on the revolution. This is where your high should be located. But instead, they create this whole system of demoralization, and you are most vulnerable to it. I'm not saying that Hunter Biden wasn't a junkie. I'm not saying that somebody didn't put that cocaine in the White House. That happened. And leaders of the system and white people got drugs too. But Africans are driven to it in a different kind of way by trying to kill the damn pain. And so, yeah, there are white dilettantes and stuff like that who want to experiment and go to these different places. And Negroes who do that too. There's a Negro who became a leading politician in St. Petersburg, Florida, that had worked overtime in undermining the Black Revolution. That's what his job was. That's what he said. He said, every time you guys do something, I make money. He was a lawyer. And he was somebody who became a successful politician, and he based part of his success on attacking drugs, paraphernalia in local communities, etc. But part of that was he had been a junkie himself. He became a junkie, not like the people who he was charging exorbitant amounts of money to defend because of drug possession. He became he was the petty bourgeois forces. His parents were successful, middle class people. He was a petty bourgeois force who did drugs as a way of what do you call it? Some kind of dilettante, people who just getting off, etc. So anyway. So after the rebellion of the 60s swept U.S. cities, urban African communities throughout the country were consciously and strategically decimated by the colonial capitalists through urban removal programs that tore down long-standing African economic, cultural, and residential centers, efforts that often included building freeways and sports arenas through African neighborhoods. Sound familiar? The urban removal programs of the 60s paved the way for the now pervasive gentrification seen in most cities today. A goal of gentrification is to disperse concentrations of African people in urban areas, a goal consistent with the counterinsurgency. Believe me, there's a lot of money that's been made in here, but one of the things is about it pays young up-and-coming white entrepreneurs to disperse the African population, because an African population increasingly represents a political problem. This is where you will find the concentration of economic development, if it's going to be any. Economic programs, economic success will happen here. This is where you will see the concentration of struggle for political power happening here. If you can disrupt that, push the Africans out of these communities, then you push the Africans out of the ability to come up with strategic programs, or certainly you undermine that for economic development and for political power. And so that's one of the reasons they would do this. I know in St. Petersburg, Florida, the St. Petersburg government had been trying to get federal funds to do a particular program. I'm trying to remember if it was weed and seed or something of this effect for a long period of time. And the government refused to give them this money. They want a lot of money. And then after the rebellions that happened in St. Petersburg, Florida, they put together a whole program, the city did, to send to the feds that had pictures and reports of rebellion, et cetera, and the government gave them the money. It was a counterinsurgency program to disperse the African community and whatever, and they used it for that purpose. And it not only dispersed the African community, it gave them permission to have what so-called target areas that they call weed and seed, where they could use federal, local, state, FBI, ATF, all these kind of military forces for this targeted area, and that people will have enhanced sentences for any offense that they were accused by the government of having committed. This was counterinsurgency. And so you disable the African community, disperse African people. And one of the reasons they did it, because every rebellion that happened came out of this particular area of that city, and they wanted to bust it up. And that's what's happening here in St. Louis and every other place that you look. So in the 1960s, the US government that was carrying out vicious colonial occupation and war against the people of Vietnam began flying opium and from Southeast Asia in CIA planes to the United States, simultaneously creating counterinsurgency program against two critical anti-colonial fronts, Vietnam and the US internal or domestic African colony. This is why as soon as pro-democracy and anti-colonial African leaders, such as Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Fred Hampton were assassinated by COINTELPRO, an epidemic of heroin hit our communities hard. By the early 1980s, following the victory of the Vietnamese Revolution over the U.S. imperialist military, the U.S. was again waging counterinsurgency, this time against the liberation movements in Nicaragua and Central America. Meanwhile, it expanded its counterinsurgency against our domestic African colony far beyond the COINTEL program, with the mission to salt the earth of the entire African domestic colony in an attempt to make sure that it would never rise up again. Our party was the only force that correctly exposed the fact that the epidemic of the deadly, addictive, laboratory-created cocaine derivative called crack that profoundly ravaged our communities for 2 decades was a continuation of colonial war against us. After the victory of the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua in 1979, the US military sent massive amounts of munitions and training to undermine it, and the Salvadoran revolution sounds like Palestine. The training and arming of these proxy forces, called the Contras, was being funded by profits from crack sales in African communities, by the Central Intelligence Agency and other arms of the US imperialist state. Indeed, our party educated Gary Webb, a reporter at the San Jose Mercury News, who used his position to expose that the US government was responsible for crack cocaine in our communities. San Jose is part of the greater Bay Area of Northern California, where for years, from our base at the Uhuru House in Oakland, we led marches and campaigns exposing that the White House is the rock house and Uncle Sam is the pusher man. In 1994, I was invited by African students to speak at San Jose State University, where I responded to some doubting Thomases with this quote: "Are you saying you don't believe that the US government would actually put drugs in the Black community?" I would tell you this. This is the government that did slavery. If it did slavery, it would do anything. They, that is the Contras, would be at Hull's ranch. Hull's was the CIA agent, to receive weapons coming on airplanes. The same airplanes would be loaded up with cocaine and brought back to this country, sometimes to Homestead Air Force Base in the state of Florida. This is in congressional records. You can find this yourselves. The Tower Commission talked about this. They don't say what happened to the cocaine after that, but they didn't keep it at Homestead Air Force Base. I want to tell you, it's in San Jose, California, Oakland, California, Tampa, Florida, and the rest of it, unquote. In 1996, Webb published a lengthy, well-documented article in the Mercury News that later became the book Dark Alliance, the CIA, the Contras, and the crack cocaine explosion, which exposes the fact that the US government did indeed impose crack cocaine into African communities and funnel millions of dollars of drug profits to the CIA-backed Contras. In his author's note, Webb states, Dark Alliance does not propound a conspiracy theory. There's nothing theoretical about history. In this case, it is undeniable that a widely successful conspiracy to import cocaine existed for many years, and that innumerable African citizens, quote, most of them poor and Black, paid an enormous price as a result. By the way, a war really initiated against Webb for that. And Dark Alliance did not have all of the materials. It was more than 600 pages of stuff that we have someplace in the archives that Webb, produced. So the cocaine economy functioned as poisoned meat thrown to a starving population. As in any colonial situation, the economic activity is closely controlled and monitored by the colonizer. It is the colonizer that determines whether there will be colonial economic activity and what it will look like. Clearly, the drugs imposed on the domestic colony, with an estimated annual value today at $500 billion, were there because the colonial state wanted them there. The absence of any legal economic life prevailed because the colonial rulers wanted it that way. The drug economy served to demoralize and criminalize our community and provided a scapegoat for the neo-colonial African petty bourgeoisie to avoid charging the colonial rulers for the conditions we face. This also allowed the petty bourgeoisie to distinguish themselves as the good Negroes, who, like the white colonial society, were being undermined and brought down by the African working class, the primary target of the drug offensive. In the wake of the government-imposed drug economy, the U.S. began passing laws that enabled the colonial state to round up millions of African workers who had recently been organized to revolution and put them in prison, eventually building the largest prison population in the entire world. Massive prison building projects were established all over the U.S. as white communities vied and fought for prisons to be able to provide colonizer nation white workers well-paying jobs at the expense of tens of millions of colonized African people stuffed into these concentration camps as their families and communities profoundly destabilized. Atrocities were and are carried out in the prisons, which created an economic boom to the white population. African communities were under siege, facing literal martial law, which set curfews amidst helicopters flying overhead as scores of repressive U.S. government organizations, deadly SWAT teams, and police programs were put up in our oppressed and impoverished neighborhoods, set up in our oppressed and impoverished neighborhoods. Police programs such as Weed and Seed, Hope 6, and vigilante neighborhood watch groups, among countless others, were established in African working class communities all over the U.S. African children were farmed out to white women who earned small fortunes as foster mothers, who tortured and in some cases mutilated our children in violation of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. One such case around which the party waged a powerful campaign was that of Yvonne Eldridge, a white woman from Walnut Creek, California, a suburb of Oakland. Eldridge made over $10,000 a month housing scores of African children from the foster care system whose parents were victims of the U.S. government's imposition of crack cocaine in the African community. Eldridge consciously made the children ill, killing at least 3 African babies and submitting at least 8 others to abuse, including cutting intravenous cords and reporting non-existent symptoms to doctors who collaborated by performing surgery to remove the infant's organs. A struggle led by the party forced the state to finally indict and bring Eldridge to trial. So it took terror and opportunism to return to class peace. Political debate within our oppressed communities was neutralized by assassination and other forms of counterinsurgency, including the inundation of drugs in the African community. So where are we now, Comrade Director?
You have about 15 minutes left.
Where are we in terms of I know it was starting in 81. Did we have a designated endpoint here?
No, just to read until the time is concluded, but we might end at page 99 at the subhead neocolonialism.
Okay. Okay. So trying to see where I just left off at. Okay, here we are. Okay, so again, I'm on page 94. Political debate within our oppressed communities was neutralized by assassination and other forms of counterinsurgency, including the inundation of drugs in the African community. and I'm quoting from the Advanced Detachment paper again, quote, "It took an all-out urban war against the Black working class in the 60s for a return to imperialist class peace and the reinstatement of the facade of a two-party system supposedly representing the class interests of all people. This war saw African workers stand up alone, not only against armed police organizations, but even armed military forces usually preserved for foreign U.S. intervention. In Detroit, this included the 82nd Airborne Division. In urban areas throughout the U.S., military tanks and an assortment of other sophisticated armaments were deployed against the unarmed Black working class communities." I want to mention this because, you know, there's this notion that somehow with this program, I think it's called 1031, something like that, where the government gives tremendous amounts of weapons, you know, like used by the military to cities throughout this country. They call them surplus weapons. They include, things like tanks in some instances and shoulder-held grenade launchers and automatic weapons, a whole host of stuff, even robots that they use, explosives and things like this. And there's this liberal Black, often Black, militant force that somehow act like this is new. They look at what happened in Ferguson when they brought out military tanks and things like that here in St. Louis, and they treat it as something new. And so doing, what they contribute to is an assumption of helping people to not recognize that colonialism has always done that. It contributes to this whole notion that we have to now start protecting ourselves from fascism. But this was always the case. I mean, in the 1960s, they imported tanks into the community of the police department in St. Petersburg, Florida. They called it the Monster. They, painted it in certain ways that were supposed to be threatening and frightening and stuff like that. We've been having to fight this for the longest period of time. And like I said, they brought the airborne. They brought the airborne that was fighting the people of Vietnam into Detroit and into Newark and what have you to crush African people. This whole thing that must be clearly understood is this is the way colonialism functions. Colonialism was attacking and had attacked from its very inception. The inception of the American empire came as a consequence of colonizing everything that we know as the Americas. I just think it's really important to say that and not act like this is some new phenomenon. Now we got to go out and fight fascism. We're fighting colonialism. We fighting fascist colonialism, and we fighting liberal colonialism. We fighting Trump's colonialism, and we fighting Biden's colonialism. Any colonialism, we have to resist it, and colonialism is what we're looking at. But at the point where we start acting like there's something new, and sometimes there will be new features of this colonial project, but this 1030, whatever it is, in terms of giving weapons to the police department, when they came to bomb in Philly, what was that, in 1985, when they bombed the MOVE organization in Philly, they got the explosive from the military when they killed this young brother in New Orleans in 1971, I think it was. Who was that? Was it Howard Johnson or on top of the Howard Johnson, who had held the whole city of New Orleans down as a part of the reaction against the terror that's being waged against African people. This guy who himself had been in the U.S. Navy and had to suffer all the humiliation that African people were suffering at that time, they got a military helicopter that was used in Vietnam to come and gun him down. So this whole notion that somehow, we're facing fascism because they're doing this, which is nonsense. We're facing colonialism. And that's the thing that we have to help everybody, understand, because we're not picking sides in this battle between white people. I mean, if we find it convenient in some ways to say, okay, they're fighting against fascism, let's do something over here to unite with it because it's going to be advantageous, that's one thing. But to say our struggle is against fascism is misdirecting, and it presupposes that colonialism is all right until this thing happened that they call fascism, and that's a lie. So the U.S. ruling class used its military power, state power, to defeat the independent revolutionary capacity of the African working class, the only internal social force that made it necessary to defend the capitalist social system. The African working class was the only social force inside the U.S. that was capable of challenging the bourgeoisie for power, the fundamental question in any revolution, power, the fundamental question in any revolution. For all these years subsequent to the military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, the bourgeoisie has expended a tremendous amount of energy and resources in keeping the African working class politically disoriented, disorganized, and unable to come together organizationally in its own class interests. The whole of the North American colonial community of intellectuals hungrily jumped on the anti-African bandwagon, a concerted effort to use the consequence of the drug economy to prove the pathology of the African community became a goal of colonial academia. Hillary Clinton made her infamous statement calling African children super predators in 1996, following on the heels of her husband's 1994 counterinsurgent crime bill, which implemented the 3 strikes you're out clause, targeting African people, and installed 100,000 new cops on the street of African communities all over the U.S. And this crime bill was written by the existing president, Joseph Biden. Petty bourgeois, pro-independence, Black nationalists from a variety of organizations joined in on this attack on the African working class, in some instances actually supporting the colonial occupying military forces in their attacks on the colonized population in the name of, quote unquote, taking back our communities. And at least one organization, the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, RNA, made participation in the US-led war against drugs a part of its strategy to weasel reparations from the white rulers, quote, because we can use the money to give RNA drug fighters, quote, drug fighting efforts a boost. Like other apologists for the colonial terror being inflicted on our community, these Black nationalists, would-be leaders, defined the U.S. imposed drug economy and its aftermath as self-inflicted. Our party took on a deep, and we should add, futile struggle with the RNA and other so-called pro-independence organizations for more than 5 years. We struggled that the African Revolution cannot move forward without defeating the counterinsurgency, the most important question of that period, and that we must defend the besieged African working class. Our book, Black Power Since the 1960s, was a chronicle of those struggles, which is the chronicle of those struggles, notes, quote, we initiated this discussion, this struggle against opportunism as part of a process to solve the outstanding problems of the revolution. The vicious counterinsurgent colonial war that defeated the Black Revolution of the 60s continues to immobilize our revolutionary process today. We must overturn the counterinsurgency as a condition for moving our revolution forward. Hence, our current fixation on the counterinsurgency. For while there are a handful of anti-colonial African organizations, some of which might actually do political work, it will take revolutionary work to liberate us. It is as simple as that. And revolutionary work is that work which correctly sums up and acts upon the period in which we exist and struggle. But for this to happen effectively and consistently, such work must be informed by advanced revolutionary theory. For years now, the African People's Socialist Party has been attempting to win the US-based African anti-colonial movement to the significance of the US counterinsurgency. We have held tribunals, forums, symposiums, and mass mobilizations to expose the counterinsurgency. The articles from the Burning Spear, which make up this book, expose the actual participation of 2 groups, the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa and the Nation of Islam, in so-called anti-drug counterinsurgent activities. But others have also participated in one way or another as well. The Nation of Islam, under the leadership of Mr. Louis Farrakhan, initiated a campaign of so-called dope busters, which achieved notoriety with the televised beating of a so-called drug pusher in Atlanta, Georgia. The New African People's Organization initiated some kind of Take Back the Streets campaign based on the assumption that violent African youth gangs or drug pushers control the streets of our colonized communities and not the militarized anti-colonial police, who are the first line of counter-revolutionary resistance to our struggle against colonialism. We of the African People's Socialist Party have argued that while we must struggle to achieve control of our communities as part of the struggle against domestic colonialism, the activities of these groups bow to the definition of the primary contradiction in our community as defined by the colonial white ruling class, especially since none of them is involved in campaigns to bust the slumlords or the cheating avaricious merchants or violent white vigilantes. None of them has campaigned to take back the streets from the ski mask wearing police thugs who violate our communities daily. This coincidence of interest with the campaigns and definition of the white ruling class and media validates the counterinsurgent activities of the colonial ruling class and state. It validates the counterinsurgency itself, notwithstanding the hollow protestations of the groups to the contrary. The approach of our party has been to identify the counterinsurgency in all its obvious components as a primary contradiction and to attempt to win all in our oppressed colonial community who can be won, to struggle against the counterinsurgency, including the government importation of drugs into our community and the vicious war against our people in the name of a war against drugs. This approach makes the government the enemy and calls on everyone, including the penny-ante drug dealers, to unite against the government in every way, including a cessation of distribution and uses of drugs. The other approach makes the African youth the enemy and unites with the government campaign against them, unquote. As our party has summed up, the African working class was demoralized and under intense ideological and political assault, exacerbated by our apparent so-called voluntary participation in the illegal drug economy that had been organized by the US government and made possible in part by the counterinsurgency war that had effectively neutralized the most influential organized components of the anti-colonial struggle. It was this voluntary aspect of the drug war that made the counterinsurgency so effective. It gave the appearance of the victim being the perpetrator, even to the victim. Nevertheless, there was a common refrain within the African colony that recognized, quote, "We don't have the planes and ships to bring drugs into our community," unquote. This popular statement echoed countless speeches, spear articles by myself, and demonstrations held by party-led organizations over many years. So I think this is where we want to stop and turn it over to you, Comrade Director.
Uhuru, Chairman. Yes, just really want to salute again this reading, just this chapter. There was no analysis about the defeat of the Black Revolution, and the clear cut, understanding that our revolution had been defeated, until you sum this whole process up, and just really, really want to salute your leadership in that process because. And as you have just pointed out that, COINTELPRO was one program of an overall effort, that's been made by the colonizer, the colonial ruling class, since the imposition of this relationship, that as long as there is the slave, the colonized fighting to be free, there is an effort by the colonizer to prevent that from happening. And, so this explains why, we are seeing these attacks made on us today. And I also, just this last section, reminds me, I heard the Wolf and the Double-Edged Blade speech, that you give, and is one of the more famous speeches that people know, from you with regard to, this whole question of the imposition of drugs, on our community as a part of the war being made on our community. So just again, really salute your leadership, Chairman. And comrades, we're going to go into Q&A in just a moment. As we see your questions, and we'll take them in just a moment. We just have to go through these announcements. So we'll try to do this quickly so that we can get to those questions. So the first one is join the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party and the African liberation struggle. Drop the charges against the Uhuru Three, sign the petition, the emergency response pledge for immediate text messages regarding the trial, read the court documents, and complete the Uhuru Three trial commitment and volunteer form. Go to handsoffuhuru.org for all of this information. And an important part of the fight back is happening Saturday, August 31st, 2024, in St. Petersburg, Florida. So make your plans now to be there for the Not One Step Backwards March and Rally demanding hands off Chairman Amalia Shatella and to drop the charges on the Uhuru 3. Sign up to march and become an endorser at handsoffuhuru.org/march. There's also a form to endorse the march and rally, and our chat moderators will put that into the chat. So comrades, make those preparations. You still have some time. Take off work, get the child care situation resolved, because on August 31st, we are marching, and on September 3rd is the start of the trial. And speaking of which, we want you to stay for the trial after August 31st. We're calling for all out for the Uhuru 3 trial, which is set for September 3rd in Tampa, Florida. We are only 79 days away from trial, and we're calling on all to sign up to attend the trial or volunteer. You can sign up at handsoffuhuru.org/trial to let us know that you will be there, and expect more information very soon about how we will wage this fight back on the ground. And make sure you organize other people to come with you. Bring a whole caravan from wherever it is that you're located and get to Tampa, Florida for the September 3rd start of the trial. Make the demand to drop the charges on the Uhuru 3 and prepare to put the colonial state on trial. Again, go to handsoffuhuru.org/trial to complete that commitment form. On Friday, June 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time at the Uhuru House in St. Petersburg, Florida, the African People's Socialist Party invites you to a very special event, tribute to Amalia Shatella. Come next Friday to meet Chairman Amalia Shatella and celebrate 60 years of his service to the African colonized and oppressed people of the world. For more information, visit theburningspear.com/events. Volunteer with the One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market this market season in St. Louis, Missouri. Our first market, Juneteenth, Not Yet Uhuru, will be hosted on Saturday, June 22nd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. There are multiple roles and volunteer positions for the day of the market. We have set up and breakdown teams, logistics, assisting vendors, giving out information, helping with sales, and many other opportunities. This is an excellent opportunity to donate your time, effort, and abilities to the African working class struggle to address health disparities, end food apartheid, and build economic independence. Visit oneafricamarket.com/volunteer for more information. On Wednesday, June 26th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, the African People's Solidarity Committee hosts Putting the State on Trial, Chairman Amalia Shatella versus the Colonial State, a special event calling on white people to join the struggle to defend anti-colonial free speech. Learn about historic campaigns of the African People's Socialist Party to push back attacks by the colonial state on African people and the party itself. Learn how you can get involved in today's struggle to drop the bogus charges against the Uhuru 3. With special guest speaker, Chairman Amalia Shatella. This event will be held in person at Aquaba Hall in St. Petersburg, Florida, and online. You can register to reserve your spot at apscuhuru.org/register. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement invites you to a special event in Miami, Florida on Saturday, June 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Drop the charges on the Uhuru 3, stop FBI attacks on anti-colonial free speech at the Freedom Lab located at 4300 Northwest 12th Avenue. Featured speakers include the Uhuru 3 Chairman Amalia Shatella, African People's Solidarity Committee Chair Penny Hess, and Uhuru Solidarity Movement Chair Jesse Neville. Register at tinyurl.com/Uhuru3 Miami. The African People's Education and Defense Fund and Uhuru Foods and Pies are working to end food apartheid for our people by opening the Uhuru Bakery and Cafe on West Florissant. The city of St. Louis says we have to have a special permit to open this cafe. We are asking everyone, especially if you live in St. Louis, to come out on August 22nd at 8:30 a.m. for a special hearing. Express your support for having healthy African food in our community where we can own and control our own food production. Send an email to stl@uhurufoods.org. Again, that's stl@uhurufoods.org to let us know you want to be there. And make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Amalia Shatella and other party speakers and leaders. Book Chairman Amalia and other Uhuru Movement speakers for your campus or organization now. You can email info@uhurutours.com or call 727-914-3621. And finally, for all events not listed here, please go to theburningspear.com/events to see everything happening inside the Uhuru movement and the ways in which you can get involved. So thank you, comrades, for your patience as we get through those announcements. And now it's time to get to your questions for our chairman to answer. So Chairman, for this study, our first question comes from Comrade Tafari in South Africa, or occupied Azania. Tafari is the director of Organization for Africa, and asks Uhuru Chairman, can the long working hours and unemployment be viewed as a form of counterinsurgency?
Well, I think that you know, it may be a way of viewing things, because what it does is obviously it assaults the ability of African people to have the long view. Almost every day that we exist is in survival mode, and so working to exhaustion and what have you certainly can be seen as counterinsurgent. And I reflect on the fact that even during the process of our enslavement, you know, keeping African people exhausted all the time, even in the process of loading us on the ships, you know, to bring us to these distant places, a real, actual organized process of keeping Africans in a weakened state of exhaustion and hunger was something that was utilized to impact on our ability to fight back. But the thing is that I think, honestly, the relationship we've had historically with the colonialism has required us to do this. So we can characterize it as counterinsurgency at any given time, where you know, this might be something there's a spike in this, but generally speaking, it's colonialism that requires us to work these long hours, whether it's called slavery or any other thing. And the colonial conditions determine everything about our labor. Everything. And so long hours, short hours, preferences given to some of us for the benefit of containing the rest of us. I mean, everything about our labor is part of the colonial project. But yeah, I think you can say that there are instances where such could be used. But I think about it, Comrade Tafari, that I can't remember what groups in the Americas, I think it was the Americas where this was used. It could have been some other place where colonialism existed, that the people would be worked to such an extent, just work to such an extent that drug use was normalized and the people were given drugs. I've forgotten what it's called. There's a certain leaf. Where is that? That has a narcotizing effect. And so that people could work beyond what they would normally do and be drugged to keep control of that. So the labor extraction of our people as colonized people, that's normal. And like I said, on some occasions, I can see how they would, in order to frustrate struggle, make it necessary for longer hours than even the norm for colonized people. The process of labor, the production of life, that's a central component of the struggle to reproduce life, is in labor. And anyway, let me just leave it there for a moment. But I know it was a muddled answer, Comrade Tafari. But generally speaking, I must just say that we always have worked more than the colonizer. We've always worked more, and leftist white people have called this something like super profits that they extract from us, but it's normal. It's normal for us to be worked like that. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, and thank you, Director Tafari, for the question. And you know, I think that's, you know, really important, Chairman, what you were saying, and just thinking about, how Africans, I mean, it's not unusual that Africans work 2-3 jobs, in a day as a process of trying to survive, just to put food on the table. And I think those surrounding conditions of the colonial, like you said, the colonial question and the fact that we have to live under these conditions and it, forces us. So we hear, sometimes that people can't participate because they got to go to work because they got to feed the kids and things like that. And so we run into that. And then the question of unemployment, I mean, I think even going back to what you were summing up about, how they don't allow us to participate in the quote unquote legal capitalist economy. So then you're forced, and you still have to survive. You still got to feed your kids and feed yourself. So you get thrust in, into the illegal drug economy. And and we just, went through that process. So just really appreciate, that response. And Director Tafari, the question.
Yeah, I think it's really important. If you look at just the data, my daddy died, he was 52 years old. He worked as a laborer on railroads, and that was one job he had. And then he and his brothers worked doing white people's yards. They call it yard work or something like that. His brothers had their own trucks and things like that. And so that was another job he had. So when he was not working on the railroad, he was working there. And if you look at the average lifespan of Africans here and around the world, it's ridiculous. And part of that is that we're not even allowed an opportunity to effectively reproduce our capacity to work. So, which is, like a part of what might be characterized as a normal process. We work and then we have to be able to work. So in order to be able to work, we have to have food, we have to have clothing, we have to have some form of shelter. And usually that's what the labor, contributes to our ability to have those things so that we reproduce the ability to work. We can't work if we're starving or if we have nothing to eat. So labor requires reproduction, and reproduction is something that keeps the society and community living. So if we are not able to reproduce life in our own community, to produce enough for the reproduction of life, and that's what colonialism does to us. That's why you look at these startling differences in the life expectations of African people and white people, of Mexicans and white people, of others and white people. The real serious extraction of labor and the value of labor that comes from our colonized communities.
Chairman, and just there are, comrades expressing unity in the chat here. And I want to get to this question because it has garnered a lot of back and forth in the chat. And, I just think it's something that we, you continue to help deepen and our understanding around this question between fascism and colonialism. And so Prester John initially raised this question on YouTube, said, so we skip fighting fascism. Fascism is a defense mechanism of capitalism in its death throes. Capitalism naturally develops on a path towards fascism. From its inception, capitalism was rife with inherent fascistic qualities. So so this question of fascism versus struggling against fascism versus colonialism. And our positions are that we struggle against colonialism, but I wanted to just open that up, raise that question from Prester, and so we can deepen that here. Chairman.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the question raised by Prester. It's something that has that movements under capitalism have been dealing with for a period of time now. This whole question of fascism, but the issue of fascism comes late in the game of oppression, of human oppression, human exploitation, the exploitation of African people, that what is now characterized as fascism is simply the instances when what happens to colonized people begins to
seep into the communities of the colonizers, that the colonizers who cannot condemn colonialism, or if they condemn colonialism, they can only condemn colonialism as something that's auxiliary to their own exploitation, who cannot see the origin of the whole social system being what Karl Marx referred to as what he referred to as primitive accumulation of capital. They cannot see the fact that what is characterized as wage slavery in Europe required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. So when did this pedestal in the New World become fascist? When did that happen? The fact is that the pedestal upon which fascism rests, when the whole capitalist social system rests upon the exploitation and extreme extraction of value from African people that in many instances have been characterized as something like super profits, etc. When will the massacre of the indigenous people in this country will it ever meet the requirements of fascism? When will the numbers of people killed by Leopold in Congo, does that meet the requirements of fascism? Why is it that the thing that we call fascism now is only something that emerged in the 1930s with Franco in Spain or in Italy with the Mussolini, the same Mussolini that we had to fight in Ethiopia. But it wasn't fascism when we were in that time. It becomes fascism when what happens intrude into what is considered normal for European colonizers. So I want to remind us that what is characterized as some of the most serious fighters against fascism. We can go to the French, who had gained some kind of reputation fighting against fascism in the underground and all of this stuff. But the same anti-fascist French controlled Vietnam, killing African people in Algeria, controlling, several entities called countries in Africa, decapitating, just doing the most horrendous kinds of things against them. What happened to George Floyd? Was that fascism? Mike Brown, was that fascism? Was the lynching of African people throughout this country fascism? Why didn't we hear that? And now the same people who decry fascism participated in the lynchings. We have this is just not true. What happens is when this characterization of fascism, which is a way the colonial question expresses itself in European colonial countries, it's actually unnecessary. I mean, if you look at fighting against colonialism, we wouldn't have fascism. In fact, the Amilcar Cabral, who was important leader in Africa fighting against Portuguese countries, and Portuguese was a fascist state at the time, a fascist state, and the left in Portugal was telling Cabral and the revolutionaries fighting against Portuguese colonialism that their primary struggle should be Portuguese fascism, declaring that if Portuguese fascism were defeated, then colonialism would go. And Cabral said, we don't like fascism either. But we think the best thing that we can do to facilitate the struggle against fascism in Europe is to wage the struggle against colonialism, because we're not sure what you're talking about in terms of destroying fascism within colonialism, but we do know that if we destroy colonialism, fascism will fall in Portugal. And sure enough, to this year, people are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the so-called Carnation Revolution in Portugal, where a fascist state collapsed, brought to an end. And this thing happened 7 months after the independence was declared in parts of Portugal, Africa, especially in Guinea-Bissau. So, that's what we're talking about. It's not trying to ignore oppression and exploitation. It's trying to define it in a fashion so that we get to the root of the problem that traps all human beings, and not just white people, not just colonizers. And this attempt now to take this definition of fascism that came when this contradiction emerged for the colonizers, for the colonial peoples, to take this definition, now impose it retroactively on what happened to Africa. I had a comrade I've worked with closely. We were the first victims of fascism. Well, no fascism, it's colonialism that when it happened. And they say this because it cannot be ignored that the horrors imposed on Africans, on indigenous peoples in this country, on the Mexicans, etc., it happened even before there was a notion of a Mussolini, a notion of an Adolf Hitler, even before Franco was born in Spain. What was happening to us, and it wasn't called fascism. It was colonialism and recognized as colonialism. And so that's what I would say to that comment, Prester John. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much. And thank you, Prester, for raising it. And, it's so important. We keep hearing that right now, from the left, and denying African people the right, and ability to fight for national liberation. We're in a struggle for national liberation from colonialism and the destruction of a whole mode of production defined by colonialism, and it's so important, just making the struggle and the distinction.
It's really important right now, every time there's a crisis, because what happens in every instance, the colonizers want to recruit those of us who are colonized to fight a struggle against other sectors of, and sometimes whole colonial powers. We don't fight in our interests. We say they will recruit us. They love us at this moment when they can characterize what we're fighting against as something that affects them negatively. So we now go fight against fascism. But we have never been able to win them to recognize the colonial mode of production. The central question in the world has nothing to do with some emergence of Trump versus Biden. How we talked about in this report right now, how Clinton ran on this program of putting more police. They didn't say this was fascist when they put 100,000 cops in the streets that killed George Floyd, that killed Mike Brown, that killed Tyrone Lewis and other Africans throughout this country. It was John Fitzgerald Kennedy who that organized the Green Berets, even helped to come up with the uniforms that they used to victimize and kill people in Vietnam and other places around the world. That wasn't characterized as fascism. Well, they kill people everywhere else. It's not fascism. The only time it becomes fascism is because it became a problem where Europeans, where the settlers were fighting against each other, and now to employ the Africans and other colonized people to their side in this opposition against their class enemies, or even people who not necessarily class enemies, who have different economic interests, then they call on Africans. After the war in the Second Imperialist World War, then England made this call to people that colonized, brutalized, forever to come home. And because England had been destroyed by the war, much of the infrastructure, etc. And now it calls on the Africans who they have been colonizing and brought to places like throughout the Caribbean and India and all these other places. They call come home. And the come home is to rebuild England. That fought in what was supposed to be a struggle to defeat fascism, but the colonialism still existed. If you don't believe it, go to England. The England that bragged about the cops not having guns in England, but the same cops who didn't have guns in England were armed to the teeth in Nigeria, armed to the teeth in India, killing people on a regular basis because this thing that they call fascism didn't exist for them as long as what the violence and extraction of value was directed at colonized peoples around the world. I'm sorry, Presta.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru. Well, I mean, I know we'll deepen this more, and that you have in many other presentations and struggles. And, I'm just, looking forward to continue deepening this understanding, so that, people can more and more, join the anti-colonial struggle and watch as all of these, other things fall in the process.
Yes.
Yeah, so just also as we near the end of the time here, want to make sure that we open it up for closing remarks from you. And I want to be self-critical because I forgot to mention where people are viewing from today. Have St. Louis, Missouri, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, occupied Azania or South Africa, Geismar, Louisiana, Fort Myers, Florida, Grenada, West Indies, Fresno, California, El Cajon, California, St. Petersburg, Florida, New Jersey, Lakeland, Florida, Moulton Heights, Alabama, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Collegeville, Pennsylvania, Largo, Florida, Birmingham, Alabama, New York City, Jamaica, Queens, New York, Richmond, Virginia, and Augusta, Georgia tuned in with us today. So, Chairman, as we go ahead and wrap up today's study, wanted to just turn it back over to you for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Comrade Director. I just want to call on everybody to gear up for September 3rd, the trial that's supposed to happen in Tampa, Florida right now. We want everybody who is capable of being there to begin organizing at this very moment to get there even earlier, the Saturday before the 3rd, that I think falls on a Monday, to get there on August 31st, where we will have massive demonstrations, rallies, and throughout the whole month of September, because the trial is supposed to last a month. Throughout the entire month of September, we anticipate all kinds of rallies, organization. We want people there who supporting Palestine. We want to have monthly forums and weekly forums and things like that to talk about and Palestine, to talk about what's happening with Cuba, to talk about what's happening all over Africa, to talk about the Sahel, to talk about the contradictions that Black people and Mexicans are facing in this country and what have you, and to organize and to rebuild an anti-colonial movement that the United States government felt necessary, along with all the other colonial powers, to destroy in the 1960s. So we say forward to September 3rd. See all of you. I know I'll see you before then, but certainly on August 31st. So uhuru, and thank you so much, brothers and sisters.
Uhuru, comrades, and make sure you go to handsoffuhuru.org for more information and to sign up for August 31st and September 3rd. We are in the long, hot summer, comrades. So everything is going towards St. Pete and Tampa, Florida, comrades. And I just want to just close out with this comment from Comrade Jaribu, says that analysis of the struggle of fascism versus the essential need to struggle against colonialism is the best clarity provided for our people. Revolutionary appreciation to the chairman. Thank you, Uhuru. And again, just want to salute this incredible discussion, the Amali Taught Me Show team, and all of you for tuning into today's study. Whether you were watching with us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, we are glad to have you on with us. And of course, salute the brilliant leadership of our chairman, Amali Yeshitela. Make sure to follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, and Instagram, and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Amali Taught Me Sunday study. So, Uhuru, comrades, relentless, Vanguard up, drop the charges on Chairman Amali Yeshitela and the Uhuru 3. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru.